They're at her house. Even Ethan. I stood in the middle of my living room. The lights dimmed just enough to give the space warmth. The soft jazz playlist I had cued earlier played to no one. The appetizers I'd arranged on the walnut serving board, herbed goat cheese fig jam crackers, sat untouched. The candles on the dining table had started to burn low, their wax curling gently down the sides, like tears. I picked up my phone again, more out of habit than hope. Nothing. No new messages. No missed calls. Then I opened Instagram, and there it was. A new story from Kala, my daughter-in-law. She was holding up a glass of white wine in a bright, bustling kitchen. The caption, "Family time at Mom's couldn't ask for better company." Behind her, I could make out Ethan, my son, and the kids. All of them grinning, Ethan flipping something on the grill out back. Everyone was there, just not here. My hand started to shake, but I set the phone down carefully on the kitchen counter. I didn't want to drop it. I didn't want to break anything, not tonight. I looked around at the space I had prepared with so much love. Fresh flowers in every room, bottles of wine chosen for each guest's preference. I even remembered Kala's dairy-free dessert, now sweating in the fridge, unopened. It was supposed to start at 3. I had sent invites a month ago. Kala replied, "Can't wait," with 3 exclamation marks. Ethan said he'd bring the kids early to help set up the outdoor lights. I moved to the window. The porch I had swept twice that morning was still empty. No cars, no laughter, no Ethan. I whispered it again, quieter this time. Even Ethan. I let the words hang in the room unanswered. Then I turned and walked into the dining room, where everything I'd laid out was waiting for someone, anyone to care. I didn't just wake up one day and buy a house. It took me 17 years, 17 to get here. Every bonus check I earned teaching was split in 2. Half went to bills, half into a quiet little savings account labeled house. Every ceramic bowl or garden gnome I sold at the Saturday market, every after-school art club I volunteered, for every painting I donated to silent auctions that no one bid on, I still saved. Not because I had extra. I never did. But because I refused to end my life in someone else's spare room. I lived small. I shared a duplex with a retired nurse for 5 years after my husband passed. We took turns mowing the lawn. I drove a car with a cassette player until the mechanic finally said, "Ma'am, they don't make parts for this anymore." I skipped vacations, skipped birthdays. I said no to every indulgence every time someone said, "You should treat yourself." Because this house, this idea was the only treat I wanted. A craftsman, with weathered wood and character. A garden where I could plant sweet peas and morning glories. A porch swing, where I could sip coffee and wave to neighbors walking their dogs. A kitchen big enough to cook for 10, and a table that could seat them all. I imagined my grandkids chasing each other through the hallways, their parents laughing in the den, my walls echoing with a kind of noise I hadn't heard in years. This house wasn't supposed to be a symbol of loneliness. It was supposed to be a place where family returned to me, where I'd finally be surrounded again. And when I found it tucked between 2 old trees on a quiet street, I knew. I walked through each room like I already lived there. I signed the papers with hands that trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the moment. This house was my proof, my reward, my one thing that couldn't be taken, dismissed, or forgotten. And now, standing in its empty dining room, it felt like I had built a cathedral for no one. When I sent out the invitations, I made them personal, not a mass email, not a generic group text. I designed each one myself, hand-cut, cardstock-pressed flowers from my garden, a small watercolor sketch of the house on the front. I even handwrote the notes inside. "Come celebrate with me." "No gifts, just you." That was the message. Ethan responded first. Of course we'll be there, Mom. The kids are excited. I still remember the warmth that bloomed in my chest reading that. Kala texted separately, adding a string of excited emojis, and promised to bring her lemon vinaigrette, but only if you make that wild rice salad I love, she wrote. So I made it just the way she liked it. Chilled with dried cherries, slivered almonds, and orange zest. I even bought the expensive rice blend from that little health shop she prefers. I stocked Ethan's favorite bourbon too, the small batch one from Kentucky he always talks about, but rarely buys himself. It's still sitting on the bar cart, unopened, gathering dust next to 3 untouched wine bottles. I keep thinking about something Kala said the last time she visited months ago for 20 minutes to drop off a birthday gift that looked suspiciously re-wrapped. She wrinkled her nose, laughed, and said, "Your house always smells like old books." I'd laughed too back then. Said it was probably the secondhand rug and the paperbacks lining the living room. But it stayed with me, the way she said it, as if my home were quaint, tolerable. Now I wonder if they ever planned to come at all, or if they just told me what they thought I wanted to hear. I wonder if those exclamation points in Kala's message were as hollow as the chairs around my dining table now. I reread their messages in the soft glow of my phone screen, trying to find sincerity in their words. But everything feels different once you've seen where they really chose to be. I set the phone down slowly, then looked across the table at a row of empty glasses, chilled and waiting for hands that never reached for them. At first I told myself they were just running late, that maybe Kala forgot something and they stopped at the store, that maybe Ethan had car trouble or the kids were slow getting out the door. By 3:15 I was still hopeful. By 3:30 I started watching the driveway like a dog waiting for its owner. By 4:00 I'd refreshed my phone more times than I could count. Messages still unopened. No calls. I walked out to the porch, sat on the swing I'd stained myself last fall, and stared down the empty road. The sound of wind rustling the trees was louder than it should have been. At 4:45 I called Ethan. It rang twice and went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I called again. Straight to voicemail. I tried Kala next. No answer, no reply. My hand shook as I hung up more from disbelief than anger. At 5:10, Mrs. Delaney from across the street stopped by with a small bouquet from her garden, lavender and sunflowers. She smiled brightly, completely unaware. "Just thought I'd drop these off, honey. Oh, and I saw your grandkids earlier. They were at that other lady's house. What's her name?" "Kala's mom. Looked like a big party over there." I stood there, blinking, unsure what hurt more, her calling Kala's mother that other lady, or the casual way she said big party. Like it was the most natural thing in the world for my family to be celebrating someone else. After she left, I walked inside, sat down at the dining table, and finally opened Instagram. The images were instant. Kala smiling in a crowded kitchen, my grandkids playing in the yard, Ethan laughing holding a plate stacked high with barbecue, my grandbaby wearing a paper crown. Someone had even baked a cake. The timestamp read 3:06 p.m. That's when I realized this wasn't a delay. This wasn't a scheduling mistake. They had made a choice, and I wasn't part of it. I stared at the screen, my fingers numb, then slowly reached over and blew out the candles on the table one by one. I finally texted Ethan. I didn't want to, not at first. I wanted him to realize it on his own, to feel the weight of absence and reach out, but the ache inside me wouldn't let it rest. So I typed, "Ethan, where are you? Is everything okay?" He replied. 7 minutes later, "Kala's mom already planned something. Didn't think you'd mind. It's not a competition. Not a competition." I stared at the screen for a long time. Those 4 words said everything and nothing at once. It wasn't even an apology, just a quiet dismissal. As if the time, the effort, the intention I'd poured into today was something I could shrug off like an old coat, as if I was being unreasonable for caring. But I did care. I cared enough to iron the cloth napkins, to make 2 types of punch, one for the kids, one spiked. I cared enough to spend hours trimming the rose bushes out front so the walkway would look nice. I cared enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, this housewarming would mean more than a real estate milestone, that it might mark the beginning of being included again. And it wasn't a competition until they made it one, until they chose one table over another, one woman's kitchen over mine. I walked past the buffet I'd arranged so carefully. The sliced fruit had dried out around the edges. The arugula in the salad had started to wilt. The wine bottles stood like sentinels, unopened and unnecessary. The cheese was sweating. I reached over and touched the bouquet at the center of the table. Petals had begun to sag under their own weight. It all felt like a performance staged for no audience. And in that quiet room, I whispered to no one, I don't think they ever saw this as my day. Then I turned toward the hallway, my hands aching with stillness, and began collecting the plates I'd set out hours ago. I used to tell myself it was nothing. Just small things, not worth the trouble. Like the time Ethan planned a birthday dinner for Calla. He invited her parents, her sister, even her aunt who lived 2 hours away. When I asked if I should bring anything, he hesitated and said, "Oh, we thought you might be busy that night." I wasn't. But I pretended I was. Or that Mother's Day 2 years ago when Calla posted a photo of their family brunch. Her mom was right there, arms around the kids, smiling. I'd been there too. I'd taken the photo. But in the version posted, I had been cropped out, not even tagged. When I mentioned it later, Calla laughed and said, "Oh, the lighting was better in that one." And then there was the time their youngest had a fever. I offered a suggestion. Nothing dramatic, just something I'd used when Ethan was little. Calla turned to me and said, "I think we've got it under control. We're trying to parent a little differently." I nodded. I backed off. I didn't offer again. I let all of it slide. For years, because I didn't want to be the difficult one, the overbearing mother-in-law, the woman who made things about her. So I smiled. I swallowed my hurt. I let them center their own version of family and convinced myself it was fine if I wasn't in the frame so long as I was in the room. But I wasn't even in the room today. Today, they didn't crop me out of a picture. They didn't forget to text. They didn't politely change the subject. Today, they just didn't come. No excuse, no apology, no space for me at all. And now, as I wrapped each untouched platter with plastic wrap, sealing in food no one wanted, I felt the weight of every unspoken slight settle on my shoulders. I had been holding them for years, calling them small, manageable. But this was the wave that finally knocked me off my feet. The next morning, I woke up to silence. No apology. No explanation. Just the same empty inbox and the same ache behind my ribs. I stood in the kitchen staring at the stacked trays of food, all still perfectly edible, all untouched. The smell of roasted vegetables and lemon dressing had settled into the air like a cruel joke. I packed it all up, wrapped the desserts, poured the juice into sealed containers. Then I loaded everything into my car and drove to the women's shelter on Alder Street. The woman at the front desk smiled when I told her it was extra from a party that didn't happen. She didn't ask for details and I didn't offer any. She just said, "This'll make a real difference tonight." I nodded, forced a smile, and drove back home with my trunk empty and my chest still full of something I couldn't name. That afternoon, I logged into the online account I'd quietly opened 4 years ago. The one labeled for the kids, emergencies only. It wasn't a lot, just a few thousand, but I had added to it over time, even skipped a trip to the dentist once so I could make the monthly deposit. I clicked close access, transferring full control back to my name. I didn't delete it, but I changed the title. It no longer said for the kids, it just said for me. Then I sat on the edge of my bed, stared at the floor, and typed the message I never thought I'd send. Next time you need help, ask your other mother. She seems better at showing up. I hit send. Then I turned off my phone and placed it face down on the nightstand. Not because I didn't want to see his reply if there was one, but because I finally understood something. The silence I'd feared for so long was already here. And somehow, for the first time in a while, I wasn't afraid of it. I was just tired. The next morning, I brewed my coffee stronger than usual. No cream, no sugar, just the way I used to drink it before I started softening things for everyone else's comfort. I took my mug out to the porch and sat on the swing, letting the steam rise into the cool air. The silence wasn't sharp anymore. It had dulled overnight, settled into something that felt more like space than absence. I wasn't expecting anyone, so when I heard the knock on the gate, I thought maybe it was a delivery. But there was Helena holding a paper bag and 2 mismatched coffee cups from the corner cafe. "Heard what happened," she said gently. "You want company or just a drop-off?" I hesitated for half a second. "Company?" I said. "Definitely company." She followed me inside and sat at the kitchen table like she belonged there. No apologies, no pretending to fix things. Just presence. That afternoon, she sent a group message to a few others from the ceramics co-op and 2 neighbors I only really waved to from across the street. "Spontaneous dinner at Corliss's," it said. "Bring nothing but your appetite and maybe a story." By 6, my house, this quiet place I'd built for a family that didn't show up, was full of voices. Helena's teenage daughter sat on the floor with one of my old sketchbooks and asked how I made the tiny gnomes with the curled hats. She'd always loved them, she said. Said they felt like someone left behind on purpose. We ate leftovers and whatever people brought. Store-bought cookies, someone's lentil stew, a tray of roasted squash. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. I listened to them laugh in my living room shoes, kicked off wine glasses half full. And I realized I hadn't felt this kind of warmth at a table in years. No one checked their phones. No one rushed to leave. When Helena leaned over and whispered, "This feels like home," I nodded. And for the first time that week, I believed that maybe it still could be. The phone rang in the middle of the afternoon, a number I knew by heart. I watched it light up the screen from across the room. I didn't move. I just sat there, letting it ring out until the voicemail kicked in. No message. A few minutes later, a text came through. From Calla. "She didn't mean to hurt you. She just feels more at home with her mom." I stared at it, reading it once, then again, letting each word scrape across whatever was left of my pride. That wasn't an apology. That was justification wrapped in sugar. Like I was the misunderstanding. Like I was being unreasonable for feeling what I felt. I walked into the spare room, opened the old cedar chest at the foot of the bed, and started digging without knowing what I was looking for. Beneath a quilt my mother had sewn and a bundle of old report cards tied with twine, I found it. A photo slightly bent at the corner. Ethan was 5. It was his first day of kindergarten. He was clinging to my legs, his little backpack slung over one shoulder, his cheeks flushed from tears. And I was kneeling beside him, arms around his shoulders, my mouth bent into one of those half smiles you give a child when you're trying to be brave for both of you. I hadn't thought about that moment in years, but now it came rushing back in full color, the way he wouldn't let go of my hand, the way he looked at me like I was his whole world. "You used to run to me for everything I whispered." I pressed the photo against my chest, holding it there like it might slow the ache. That little boy with scraped knees and impossibly big feelings, he was mine. And maybe he still was somewhere under all the distance and silence and choices that I couldn't unmake. I set the photo on the desk by the window and stood there a long while, watching the light shift across the floor, wondering how love could stay so steady in me when it seemed to drift so easily in them. A week later, I printed the sign and hung it by the gate open studio Saturdays. Pottery, coffee, and conversation. Nothing fancy, just an invitation. I started with a folding table and 3 chairs. A few extra mugs. A pot of coffee that stayed warm on the burner longer than expected because no one wanted to leave. I brought out old clay scraps and some glaze samples I had nearly thrown away in a moment of frustration months earlier. But people came. First Helena, then the young couple from down the block, then a retired nurse who'd always waved but never spoken more than a sentence. Word spread faster than I thought it would. Teenagers wandered in, curious. A man in his 70s asked if he could just sit and listen. A woman recovering from chemo asked if she could come, even if she didn't want to talk. I said yes. Always yes. They didn't share my blood. They didn't owe me anything, but they showed up. Week after week, they came back. Some made small bowls and pinch pots. Some just drank coffee and told stories about their childhood homes. They filled my living room with a kind of laughter that felt unforced, with silences that didn't feel heavy. I didn't mention Ethan, not once. I let the silence between us exist without trying to stretch it or solve it. It wasn't punishment. It was space. A space I needed to grow back into myself without folding at the sound of his voice. One evening, after the last guest had left, I stood in the kitchen with a warm mug between my palms. The house smelled like clay and cinnamon and slightly burnt coffee. I leaned against the counter and exhaled. This house wasn't empty, not anymore. And maybe it had never been built for the people I thought it was meant to hold. Maybe it was always meant to hold me fully, finally, without apology. I turned off the light above the sink, and as the room faded into dusk, I realized I was no longer waiting for anyone to arrive.